Hello, 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 and welcome to a bonus episode of the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Zatlin. How's it going, man?
Ben, no time to chit chat. Let's just jump right into it. We got scratch and entry reactions today. These are technically still need to be considered by the
Mhm.
coaches for the NCAA Indoor Championships. So there are some possibilities that coaches could come back and say, "Hey, that was done in error. That's not correct." It's happened a couple times before. It doesn't happen that often. Usually doesn't change a dramatic amount. So just know that these are to be considered, to be scratched. These are not official entries, but for the most part, 99% of the time, they're set to go. So that's what we're going to review today. Quick episode, 20, 25 minutes. Also, shout out to the one person who added to Apple Podcast reviews. We appreciate you. Yeah, I know, right? I got four. That's basically four before we have a weekly release of the podcast. So, Ben, where do you want to start?
Let's start with the men, and let's start at the 800. We saw two men scratch, Elliott Cook and Nathan Green. Will Sumner is now the last man in there. This was probably exactly as we would have predicted. I think you predicted this exact scenario in your scratch predictions. So not a whole lot here. It's good to see Sumner make it after winning SECs. It feels like this would be a really good opportunity for him to get national experience under his belt. But overall, not that surprising.
No, really the only way that this could have been surprising is Elliott Cook. I really think it was almost a 50-50. I would have said 60% chance that he went to the mile, 40% chance he went to the 800 meters, scratched out of the 800 meters. I think that's the right call for him. I just think the mile with the tactics involved there and his speed, he has a little more flexibility in terms of how he can run those races. So I do think the 800 is more wide open than the mile, but I do like this call for Cook. And I think kind of like you were talking about, this is pretty predictable.
Absolutely. So not much here. I agree with you on Cook that I think the mile, especially the amount of men that scratched the mile, a lot of them weren't surprising necessarily, but they thinned out that field dramatically. So
Yeah.
I think him going to the mile, good move there. But let's transition to the mile, where this was probably one of the biggest surprises of all the scratches or non-scratches. We see Brian Fay is going to run the mile. I like this stuck out immediately. This was one of the first things I saw. I could not believe that we are going to see what, six Washington men run?
It's six. I think it is. Yeah,
That
it's
is
six.
wild. And it's crazy because I mean we talked about this in our last episode that it was just like assumed Lum is going to run the 3K and the DMR. Faye is going to run the 5K, 3K because that just seems to be his better what he's better suited to. And there's just so many other Washington men in the mile that you really don't need another Washington miler in there. But clearly Andy Powell thinks that he can add something and that by having six guys in there, they can just completely fill up the final if they all qualify and just really do some damage in this one event.
I don't get it. I'm just sorry. I just don't get it. Like, why do you need another miler? You don't. Like, if from Washington's team point scoring
Yep.
perspective, it makes so much more sense to do the 5K. Maybe they really want him on the DMR, but like, do you really? Is it really going to make that much of a difference? Like, I don't know, and it just kind of is silly. I don't understand it. I think he's going to do great. I have no problem with that, but in terms of like point scoring, I don't think he's any better in the mile than he would be the 5K. Maybe a little bit better in the mile, but not a ton. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean the marginal utility does not seem to like you would think that like even if he finishes second in the mile, for instance, he's probably pushing down his own teammates in terms
exactly.
of scoring. So you're really not gaining that much. Whereas in the 5K, where you have no other Washington guys, you would he would be a very good bet to at least score points. Whereas no other Husky's going to do that, and he's not even in their DMR like 8-man group that's entered. So clearly they're
Oh,
not even looking to run him in the DMR. So it is a puzzling choice. I am still very interested just to see 6 guys from the
Oh
same
yeah,
school run. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this is it's going to be really fun to watch 6 guys try to navigate rounds, and how many of them are going to be in the same heat is also going to be very fascinating.
It's true.
In prelims, but it is still a puzzling decision from an overall points perspective.
My economics major mind is got really excited when you said marginal utility. So yeah, undergrad Garrett's really happy right now. Anyways, Duncan Hamilton scratches from the mile. Apparently, I guess he just wants to go all in for the 3K.
Yeah.
I get it, but like I don't know if I really thought that he was so much better in the 3K than he is the mile. You know, especially because the mile, like, yeah, you have to face the Washington guys, but like, you know, like now granted, he ran the 359 at sea level, did not do well, was upset by Will Smith. But I didn't think like, you know, with a 352.99 conversion, is he really like that much better off in the 3K? I don't know.
It's like the Morgan Beal scum from last year of like someone that maybe you came into this being like, you're probably not great for the mile, but after running that fast, I mean, you it seems as you might as well give it a shot. But I think he just probably has a lot of confidence in himself to be one of the few fresh people in that 3K and really give that a go. So I don't hate that. Elsewhere, like Kieran Lum scratching, not surprising there. Fouad Masaudi scratching, we had predicted that. I was a little surprised to see Ryan Shoppy and Ethan Strand at scratch. I think those are obviously DMR related decisions, as were Liam Murphy and Charlie O'Donovan of Villanova. The DMR, I think that's the other big takeaway from this men's mile scratches. The DMR is going to be very loaded and very quick based off of the amount of men that are scratching the mile to run it.
I'm so upset because outside of Faye and Hamilton, if you just swap their accepted versus scratches, I had this right. I had this perfectly. And that's what I'm a little upset because Rizzo did get in, and I predicted Rizzo would be the last guy in, except like it didn't happen quite the way I thought. I was this close, but I thought Strand would scratch for the DMR. He did. I thought if Masaudi is going to scratch for the DMR, it'd have to be Shoppy too. He'd have individual glory in the 3K. He's good in the mile, but like the points Oklahoma State could gain in the DMR seems just as useful. And they have a chance to win the national title. So for that reason, I'm gonna go. That's why I said those scratches. But otherwise, I mean, this is pretty chalk.
I thought Shoppy, what they might do is have him run the mile and then have him do the 12 leg and then have Masaudi close, and then you still put yourself in a good position with the DMR, and or they could put Juan Diego Castro in that 1200 leg. Too. Like, it's not like they don't have options, and really the mile leg is the most important. If you have a fresh Masaudi, you're pretty much in good shape. So I am a little surprised there, but none of these, like you said, were that unpredictable. For the most part, they all make sense.
Let's move to the 3K. Okay, now we're done with the 3K. Moving to the 5K. Yeah, no one scratched the 3K. We knew no one was going to scratch the 3K. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, is there anyone at any point who even, Van Oppen was the one who scratched at like NCAA 25. No one was going to scratch this. We're moving on. 5K, a couple interesting ones. Obviously, Faye. And then Sam Gilman scratches the 5K. I don't know how I feel about that, but I think I kind of like it. I think his best event is the 3K. I think the 5K field is relatively a little bit easier than the 3K field, not by a lot. But I kind of like that. And I'm sure it was it. So Gilman's out, Faye's out. And so you know who really likes it? It's Devin Hart and Joey Noakes.
Yeah.
Those guys really like it. So a little surprising there, but I think it's a 50-50 decision. I think he could have gone right either way.
Yeah, I was surprised to see him scratch that, but I do, like I said, with Hamilton, being one of the few fresh people in the 3K, it is going to be an advantage. And if you want to go all in on one event, you want to go all in what you think is your best event too, then I think that makes sense. It is surprising to see someone scratch a race, another opportunity to race at nationals. But again, I think that goes back to where his mind is at and what he thinks he's best at.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, don't totally hate it, but I just don't know if the field was going to be, it's going to be that much easier in the 3K, right? Even if he's fresh, but I do get it. Let's go to the women. Some interesting scratches starting out on the 800 side. Britton Wilson, totally unsurprising. I think we all pretty much knew that. Although the last few races, I did think I was like,
her running at SECs and being very competitive. I was like, maybe they're gonna put her in the 800, but it wasn't a shock to see her end up with a scratch. It was surprising to see Lindsey Butler scratch the 800, despite being NCAA number 16 on the performance list. She still came in as probably one of the top favorites, but she has run 4:31 in the mile and elects to focus on that instead of the 800. On a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised were you to see Butler forego the 800?
Probably like a 6.5, maybe like a 7. It's more just because I think I'm used to seeing her there, but it's a give and take scenario. She's way more experienced, way more accomplished in the 800 meters, knows what to do in this kind of situation, but she hasn't run that well as of late. The mile, she's pretty new to this level of mile, prowess, I guess. She's, 4:31 was a big leap from her PR. And yet that's the race where she's ranked very highly. So it's kind of like a balancing act of, what do you want to do? The race that you have more experience in, or the race that you've been killing as of late? So I don't think it's one of those situations where I don't think there was a wrong decision, but I was a little surprised just because I think I'm just so used to seeing Butler in the 8.
Yeah, I agree. This was obviously a scenario that we could foresee happening, but especially with the loaded 800 field this year and just the way she looked at ACCs. So it was certainly on the table, but I think it is still a surprise to see her scratch her what has traditionally been her main event. And so that lets in Marlena Prey as the last one in for Washington out of this 800 field. Any other takeaways before we move to the mile?
Britton Wilson is also not listed in one of Arkansas's DMR legs, which is interesting. Throughout this entire season, we've been like, put her in the DMR, put her in the DMR. She's not listed. I don't know if that means that she can't run. I don't know what the exact rules are with the DMR and the relays. Interesting decision. I also feel really bad for Lena Ellsworth. She had such a good season. Honestly, throughout the entirety of the season, she was probably better than Claire Seymour for most of it, and she's not going to get in, which is kind of a bummer. But I did want to shout her out because I do think she deserves some recognition for a really good season.
Absolutely. Let's go to the mile, and we saw a lot of scratches in the women's mile, just like on the men's side. Caitlin Tui, we saw McCabe, Galvadite, O'Sullivan, Whitaker, and Rohotinsky all scratch the mile. Margot Appleton, I think, was the last one in this event. Not a whole lot of surprises here. I think you could have predicted almost all these women. A little surprising to see Rohotinsky scratch. I would have thought she would want to run if she did qualify. But other than that, nothing too surprising. I guess O'Sullivan is another little bit of a surprise, but you can see that they're just going to go all in on the DMR.
Yeah, Galvadite. Sure, like she's gonna run the DMR, but like, why not run the mile? She's kind of been struggling a little bit as of late, and struggling, I use that word lightly. She's still running okay. She's still holding her own, but she hasn't been at 100% for whatever reason. So that was surprising to me. Tui, very predictable. McCabe, somewhat predictable. I think we could kind of see that coming. I agree, Rohotinsky. You think if you're BYU, you want to get your rookie some experience. I guess that means she's just going to run the DMR though, which I now feel pretty confident about. Going to be pretty interesting to see what happens there. And that means Riley Chamberlain, so probably not have her double back either. Sophie O'Sullivan. It's interesting that they had Gibson accepted into the entries, but Sophie O'Sullivan, no. So I think they saw O'Sullivan run that, what was that crazy 316 split or something like that back at Boston U.
Yeah.
I think they like that a lot. And I think they were like, listen, if we can still win this if Gibson doubles back, but O'Sullivan has to be at 100%.
Yeah.
So I kind of get it.
Yeah. I think Galvadite, you would have expected her to have eventually qualified in the 800, but she just never did, which is, I think, a sign of maybe her not being at quite 100%. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what these DMRs do with all these women scratching, and we can get into that more in a second. Let's go to the 3K, where we didn't see any scratches other than Amaris Tanisma scratching because she had to. And that allowed Sadie Sargent to be the last one in the 3K.
There is a key development here, though. And what is it, Ben?
What is it?
Look closely. Think about it.
Oh, yes, obviously. Parker Valby accepted,
yes.
which is exciting. Yes, that was another takeaway that I just did not write down. Yes, the fact that she is running the 3K is very exciting.
We should say she's accepted. The coaches didn't scratch her, so that's a positive sign. Doesn't guarantee anything per se, but it's a good sign, and I will leave it at that.
If she wasn't healthy, she wouldn't have been accepted. She would have been scratched if there was an injury. So we can at least put that off the table, that she is healthy enough to not scratch. So that is exciting. But yeah, that's it for the 3K. Not a whole lot of action there, just like on the men's side. But on the 5K, we did see two scratches, Lauren Gregory and Jasmine Fair scratching, allowing Amanda Vestry of Syracuse to be the last qualifier. I think we kind of expected this from Lauren Gregory, with her running probably the mile in DMR, and 3K as well. Is she in the 3K too?
No, she's not. No.
Okay. So mile and DMR. And then Fair, though, was a bit of a surprise, seeing as I don't think she's going to be running anywhere else.
Correct. So she ran that 15:38 in mid-February, and then if you kind of look after that, she didn't race at all again.
Gotcha.
I had heard that she was kind of banged up a little bit, so it sounds like that's the case here in terms of, maybe potentially just trying to stay healthy for an outdoor track season. So kind of makes sense when you kind of look back at what's going on. She hasn't raced since February 10th or February 11th. Makes sense. Unfortunate, because it's really great to see a Tennessee woman like on this national stage. You really want that, especially with Carlson's first year. But if the goal is to kind of keep her healthy for outdoors, like I kind of get it. So, but yeah, other than that, Gregory was very much expected. I think we kind of knew that was coming. And with no 3K, the mile DMR double makes sense for her.
Absolutely. We didn't mention on the men's side, but we can quickly for the women. Any thoughts on the DMR after all these scratches?
No. I don't know. It's really hard because you just don't know who's going to run what. I think this is roughly what we expected. It just kind of depends, like who's going to double back the most efficiently. And it also depends on like what NC State wants to do. Or do they want to keep Samantha Bush fresh? It doesn't look like Tui would. Who knows? Who knows what could happen? I assume Tui's not going to come back from the 5K. She's also done crazier things.
Yeah.
So maybe she does. And if they win, I mean,
be absurd.
Then we're going to argue about her being the GOAT. Are we really going to do that? But yeah, I mean, that's all I really have here.
Yeah, I think basically after these scratches, the favorites remain the favorites. Like Washington, I think you would expect them to win as with O'Sullivan coming in fresh and Gibson still running the mile and should be able to double back okay. I think Oregon also looks good with their milers' ability to double back. And then, like you said, NC State with Tui is very much an X factor, depending on what they decide to do. On the men's side, though,
can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
Amina Matoud, does she run the mile DMR 3K triple?
I mean, she was a workhorse at ACC, so it wouldn't be stunning to see her try to then put her in there, and they'd be very competitive, even with her doubling back. I, it seems like a lot. I would lean towards no, but I wouldn't be stunned to see her out there.
They do have a 4:39 miler in Carly Forker from she's a grad transfer from Bucknell. So she made the ACC finals. Maybe they're like, hey, put her in the 12, throw Frias in the anchor. Tough to say, but it's an interesting dynamic there. So
Yeah, I agree. On the men's side, I think similar kind of story of the favorites remain the favorites. I think it's going to be a very loaded DMR field this year, with Oklahoma State having all their main guys fresh. Washington, they only have 6 guys listed, which is interesting. And Joe Wascom is one of them. So it'll be interesting to see if he runs that 12 leg after the mile, and Kieran Lum should be fresh for that mile anchor leg. And then Villanova has all their guys fresh. They should be very, very competitive. And then North Carolina should be very, very good with Ethan Strand coming into that fresh as well. Anybody else kind of catch your eye in the DMR after these scratches?
1 second. Did want to check something. So yeah, I would have said Michigan if Nick Foster wasn't doubling. It's not that they still can't be competitive, but it'll be interesting to see how he rebounds on the double. But yeah, I mean that's all I really got. I think this is all pretty straightforward for now.
I agree. This is turning into a great meet, and that DMR is going to be a fascinating race. I think both on the men and women's side. You got collegiate record holders on either side running pretty much pretty fresh, and it looks like very similar lineups as they did when they broke those records. So a lot of good stuff in store for us.
Ben, an emergency podcast has to be somewhat short, so we're going to cut it there. Thank you for jumping on. I appreciate it. I know you have, a wife and kids, so I appreciate you. And everyone, go leave 5-star rating, Apple, Spotify, and we're also on YouTube now. Go subscribe there. We'll put this video up there as well, all of our other podcasts as well. But stay tuned to the site. We've got a whole lot more on the way. So, Ben, anything else?
That's it. Until next week, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.